All right, good Yom Tov and Chag Sameach. Right, concentrate on the prayers today, not on what you're going to eat tonight. Be very, very careful. So today I decided, with all the trouble we had this week, that I'm going to revisit an old sermon, an old board that I gave back in 2017. So some of you guys were not here back in 2017. Some of you were here, but might have been away. So maybe you haven't heard it, maybe you forgot about it. But I decided to read it up again this week and try and rehash it a little bit and see what else we can learn from it. And so today, please, hopefully, it won't be something completely new to you, but it might be, who knows? So here's me resurrecting a sermon from 2017 about the idea of Pesach. And what is Pesach supposed to teach us? The main idea of Pesach is, of course, the redemption. That's what we're supposed to be thinking about, is the redemption. So today I want to look at that because our view of the redemption is sometimes obscured and not really in the right time frame. Because how long did it take us to be redeemed from Egypt? That happened all at once at midnight when we left Egypt? No, because 7 days later, they came pursuing us to the sea. That's what today is all about, right? Redemption is not a once-off, once saved, always saved kind of thing. That's not what the Torah is teaching us. It tells us only when we crossed the splitting of the sea and we saw the Egyptians lying dead on the seashore, only then were we truly redeemed. Then they believed in God and in his servant Moses. So that's why today, the seventh day of Pesach, God told us that shall also be a Yom Tov. It shall also be a Shabbat unto you to remind you of this very reason. So today we read the story of the sea splitting in front of us. So let me tell you what happened. Because you would think, if you've witnessed all these miracles that the 10 plagues brought about, and you've witnessed the miraculous food falling from heaven, and you've now been traveling for 7 days, and then you see behind you is Pharaoh's army coming at you, and in front of you is a sea, you would think that people would be wondering, what's God going to do this time? What kind of miracle are we going to witness this time where God's going to save us? But instead, what do they say to Moses? They complain, saying, is it because there were not enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die? This is the reaction they give 7 days after witnessing the final of the 10 plagues. Is it because there weren't enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die? So apparently, the graveyards in Egypt were fully booked. Have you thought about this? Why would they say that other than just sarcasm? We just went through the 10 plagues. How many millions of people don't you think died during those 10 plagues? They had to have mass funerals. And the very last of the 10 plagues was the firstborn, the death of the firstborn. In one night, let's say maybe a fourth, a quarter of the entire population died right there. So you can imagine what was happening in Egypt with all the funerals and all the graves that they had to dig for these people. So there was no space for a single person to be buried. Maybe that's why these pharaohs decided to build these massive pyramids to keep themselves separate from all the other people that are dying left, right, and center. But think about that saying. There were no empty graves in Egypt, is what they are saying. Now, the Midrash comes along and tells us, wait a minute, there was at least one empty grave in Egypt. And of course, for us as Messianic believers, Pesach time is the time we celebrate the idea that there was one empty grave in history when Yeshua was resurrected and the tomb was empty. He resurrected. He is not here, but he has risen. Okay, so at the start of today's reading, today I asked Johan to read for us the song of the sea, so we can at least hear the song. But the whole reading for the parasha for today starts off a bit earlier with, of course, Moses. When everyone else is busy packing their stuff to make their patkos for the road, what is Moses doing? He goes and collects the bones of our ancestor Joseph. How did Moses find the bones of Joseph? I've told you guys the story many times in the past. Let me just recap it, because there's a few different opinions and stories as to how he found the bones of Joseph. It's been a few generations since Joseph died, right? So one story tells us there was a lady in one of the 12 tribes. Her name was Sarah. This lady was so old that, remember that joke? I was so old that the Dead Sea was just sick when I was alive, right? And now it's dead. So this lady was so old that she was actually alive when they buried Joseph's bones. So Moses went to her and asked her, where did they bury Joseph's bones? She says, I remember what they did back in the day. And what she says is they took his bones, they put him in a metal coffin, and they threw him into the Nile. Why? Because Joseph was like a source of blessing for Egypt. Wherever he went, there was prosperity. He had the golden touch, the Midas touch. So they decided to throw him into the Nile. So the Nile will also be prosperous forever, because this is what this guy does. Wherever he goes, success follows him. So she remembers exactly where in the Nile it happens. So she tells Moses, go to that spot over there, by that beach, and you will call out to him and you will find him. So Moses goes and he goes to that spot and he stands there and he says, Joseph, Joseph, the moment that you prophesied about when we will be redeemed has arrived. You made us promise that we would take your bones with us. So here I am. If you want to go with us, come out now. If not, then we are absolved of this oath. And what happened? Out comes the coffin, lands next to Moses, just like Jonah being spit out of the whale. It also has a resurrection theme to it as well, if you think about that, eh? So we're studying that today. And there we have the coffin of the bones of Joseph right there next to Moses. That's one version of the story. Now, there's another version of the story that I want to share today that tells us a little bit about something that I want to discuss and links it a little bit more to Pesach. From Tractate Sota 13a, goes as follows. Rabbi Natan says, Joseph was buried in the royal catacombs. Not just any catacombs, not just any graveyard. He was in the royal catacombs, maybe even in one of those pyramids. Eh? He was buried in the royal catacombs. So Moses went and he stood next to the royal catacombs. And Moses shouted, Joseph, the moment about which God swore that I will redeem you has arrived. And therefore, the time of the fulfillment of the oath that you made the Jewish people promise to take your bones with them has also arrived. If you show yourself now, it is well and good. If not, we are absolved of your oath. And at that very moment, Joseph's coffin trembled and distinguished itself from all the other coffins that fell out of the catacomb. How's that? You've heard about people turning around in their graves, right? Here's Joseph. So Moses took it and brought it with him. And there they went on their journey. Okay, so there you have it. Interesting to think that what this is actually showing us is that the empty tomb is a sign of the start of the redemption. Think about that as a concept. The empty tomb is the start of the sign of the redemption, that the redemption has started. Now, think about Joseph as well and the faith that Joseph had. Remember when his father Jacob died? Him and his 12 brothers left Egypt, went to Israel, buried their father Jacob in Israel, and then came back to Egypt. Joseph made his brothers and their descendants promise when he dies to wait first until the final redemption, until the redemption from Egypt. And when that redemption comes, then only take him with him. He doesn't want to go alone. He doesn't want to be buried by himself. He wants his merit to help the redemption of all his brothers, of all of Israel. It's a very interesting shadow of Messiah in what Joseph decided to do there, that he took it upon himself. So here we go. We found the bones of Joseph, and off we went with the bones of Joseph. Who knows? Maybe it was his entire body. Maybe it was just that loose bone that we studied last week that we spoke about. Let me continue reading you from the Talmud, what it says here in Tractate Sota. It says, Moses took it and brought it with him. And all those years that the Jewish people were in the desert, there were these two caskets with them. What are the two caskets? The one casket of a dead man, Joseph's coffin, and the other one was for the divine presence, the Holy Ark. The Ark behind me. Remember, we had that Holy Ark that traveled with us in the wilderness that had inside it the Torah. These traveled together during the wilderness. And people who would pass by would say unto the Israelites, what is the nature of these two caskets you guys are carrying? And they would reply to them saying, one casket belongs to a dead man. The other casket belongs to the divine presence of God, the living God. People would ask perplexed, saying, and is it then the way of the dead to travel with the eternally alive divine presence of God? And they would reply to them, saying, the contents of this casket, Joseph, fulfilled everything that is written in the contents of this casket, the Torah. They're saying that Joseph kept the Torah perfectly. In fact, the Mechilta comes along, which is the oldest commentary we have on the book of Exodus. It tells us that one by one, he actually fulfilled every one of these 10 commandments. So there's a whole commentary here where Rashi actually quotes it and says that he fulfilled all of them. For example, Exodus 20 says, I am Hashem your God. That's the first commandment of the 10, right? It is written regarding Joseph that he said rhetorically, am I supposed to be in place of God? So he was saying that God is the only one. So there we go. You fulfilled commandment number 1 of the 10. It is written in this one, you shall not recognize other gods before me. That's commandment number 2 of the 10, right? And it is written regarding Joseph that he said, I fear God and no other gods. Genesis 42, verse 18. And it goes through the list through every single one of these 10 commandments and shows how Joseph fulfilled them. But not only that, it goes beyond that. After going through each of the 10 commandments, the Mechilta continues that there were also the rest of the mitzvot in the Torah fulfilled by Joseph. And it gives us a bunch of examples how Joseph fulfilled them, pointing out to us that Joseph actually kept the Torah perfectly. Now, that's a big statement, right? Saying that Joseph was basically a sinless man, perfectly keeping the Torah. And this is why, according to our Midrash, when we arrived at the splitting of the sea that we just read here a moment ago, what does it say about that? We sang it this morning. The sea saw and fled, the Jordan turned back. Why did the sea, and what did the sea see and flee? What made the Jordan turn back? Midrashim tell us they saw Joseph's bones. Why did Joseph's bones make them split? Because he was a sinless man. In fact, they go and explain that there's one commandment, one thing that Joseph did in his life. Remember when Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him and he struggled? He resisted. That's how we read that in the Torah, right? He struggled between following his animal nature and the divine nature. And he eventually decided to follow the divine nature and do the right thing. When the sea and the Jordan River saw that Joseph overcame one of the most difficult tests in life to overcome your animal nature, they themselves decided to change their nature as well. And that's why the sea split. It was no longer tohu vavohu. It split up into two beautiful walls. Right? That's why the Jordan River no longer flowed forward. It now flowed backwards because it saw this divine nature that Joseph had chosen. Okay. So in the merit of the sinless man, the sea split for the entire nation, all his brothers and their children. Now, of course, this is a midrashic saying about Joseph, calling him a sinless man. Right? Was he a sinless man? I don't know. You're welcome to try and find him sinning somewhere in the Torah. But we do know someone who is, of course, a sinless man. Of course, Yeshua. And he has a title known as Mashiach ben Yosef, which literally translates Mashiach, the son of Joseph. Why? Because he also has a similar role as Joseph. Just like Joseph gets Joseph's reward for being a sinless man was suffering on behalf of his brothers, so too with Yeshua. Think about Joseph's life, right? He didn't want to be the chosen one, but his father favored him above the other brothers. And he sent them out there to go look for his brothers, even though he knew his brothers would beat him up, maybe even kill him. And what happens? Lo and behold, they beat him up and nearly kill him. They sell him off into a stinky caravan with the Ishmaelites. He goes to Egypt. There he becomes, he works hard. And he thinks someone who works so hard should deserve some great title that he gets. What happens? He gets thrown in jail for false accusations. #MeToo happened to him. And he gets thrown in jail. Did he deserve any of this? No. He was suffering undeservedly. He didn't deserve any of the suffering. But how did he view that suffering? He says to his brothers when he meets up with them, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. He understands that he had to suffer on behalf of all his brothers. And that's why he is the archetype of the suffering servant. Now, there's another midrash that sheds some more light upon this idea. I want to read to you guys from Exodus 21, verse 7. This idea that in the merit of this sinless man, the suffering servant, the sea was split for us. Listen to this. I think I've mentioned this in the past as well. All right, it's based on the verse that Hashem said to Moshe, why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them journey forth. Okay, it says, why do you cry to me? Let me just find the place where I want to start reading. Here we go. Rav Chama bar Rav Chanina said, when the Israelites departed from Egypt, the angel Samael arose to prosecute them. Who's the angel Samael? That's another name for Satan. It's one of his nicknames, okay? This is what they call him on the streets. Nickname, there you go. What's that nickname in Afrikaans? Isn't it a truthful name or something? There we go. Anyway, so he arose to prosecute them as we arrived at the sea. And Rav Chama bar Chanina further explained this in the name of his father as follows. What occurred at the sea with the angel Samael, or Satan, may be explained by means of a parable. Listen to this parable. It's analogous to a shepherd who was passing his flock through a river when a wolf came to attack his flock. The shepherd, who was an expert in his field, what did he do? He took a large goat or a large ram and he gave it to the wolf to keep it busy. The shepherd said, let the wolf be occupied with this goat until we cross the river. And then afterwards, I will come back and bring the goat. Similarly, when the Israelites departed from Egypt, Samael, the angel, Satan, arose to prosecute them. He said before the Holy One, blessed is he, master of the universe. Until now, these Israelites were a bunch of idolaters in Egypt. And yet you're going to split the sea for them. They don't deserve it. Let me drown them in the sea. But what did the Holy One, blessed is he, do? he gave over to Samael Job. Job, who was one of Pharaoh's advisors. For about Job, it is written, a man who was wholesome and upright. He feared God and he shunned evil. And behold, Job is in your hand, he said. The Holy One, blessed is he, said, while Samael is occupied wrestling with Job, my children Israel will ascend and descend from the sea. And then afterwards, I will come back and I will rescue Job. And the Midrash goes on and gives us a bunch of proof texts from the book of Job that talks about this happening to Job, that he was wrestling with Satan. This is why Job was a suffering servant as well, because God actually sent him to Satan to keep Satan busy while we redeem all the other people, the other 12 tribes of Israel. On his behalf, the suffering servant, he helped the rest of us. Now, that's one version of the story. Today, I want to share with you another version of the story. This one comes from the Midrash Genesis, Rabbah 57, verse 4. And it goes as follows. So first it brings that same story about the wolf and the goat. And then Rav Chema says, there's a different version of it. He says, this can be compared to a king who was sitting at a meal. So a king sitting at a meal makes us think about the Messianic banquet, right? We're all looking forward to. But while he was sitting at the meal, a dog came and joined up with him. Sounds like the Chad Gadia, eh? We had the one little goat. Now we've got the dog that came with the cat that ate the goat. All right, so the dog came and joined with him. This is now Satan the dog. And he said, give the dog a loaf of bread to contend with while we continue eating. Similarly, Satan came to prosecute the Israelites. So God incited him against Job instead. This is what is written, that God has handed me over to an evildoer and he pushes me aside because of the wicked. Job 16, verse 11. All right, and it goes on to explain why this happened, etc., etc., etc. So that's a different version of the story. One version says, I gave them a ram or a goat. Other version says he gave this dog a loaf of bread and said, keep yourself busy with that. Let me save my children while you suffer. So what we see here is that idea of the suffering servant that's suffering on behalf of Israel. And Israel over here is called, in one essence at least, it's called, not Israel, sorry. The thing that was handed over was a loaf of bread. This, of course, makes us realize about Yeshua. It makes sense to us, especially in a time like Pesach, where we call Yeshua the bread of life, where he said to us at that Pesach Seder, he took the matzah, he broke it, symbolizing his body. His body was broken on behalf of all Israel. And he says, take this, eat this. This is my body that was given for you. This is my blood for you that was shed on behalf of many. It's that suffering servant image once again. Okay, so it was in that merit of the perfect, sinless one, who was a suffering servant for us, that the sea split so we could finally complete the redemption. But that's not the only person who gave up their life in order for the sea to split. There's somebody else who did the same thing. Someone by the name of Nachshon ben Aminadav. You guys know him, right? He, of course, was the prince, the Nasi of the tribe of Judah. He's mentioned in the lineage of Yeshua as well in the Gospels, where it tells us his lineage. And the Talmud tells us a story of what happened with Nachshon ben Aminadav when we approached the sea. It's also in Tractate Sota. This one's in 37a. And it tells us that the Israelites were standing there in front of the sea like a bunch of kids or adults at a swimming pool when it's too cold. You know, you put your foot in, you say, it's too cold, I'm not jumping. You jump in first. No one says, I'm not going to jump in first, you jump in first, right? The Talmud actually says that the Israelites had a whole argument like this. And it says here, Rabbi Yehuda said, this tribe was saying, I will not be the first to descend in the sea. Well, another tribe declared, I will not be the first to descend into the sea. Each tribe was unwilling to enter the water first. And at that point, the prince of the tribe of Judah leaped forward and he descended into the sea first. As it says, and this is a quote from Hosea 12 verse 1, it says, Ephraim has surrounded me with falsehood and the house of Israel with deceit. But Judah still ruled with God, meaning that he had faith in the Holy One, blessed is he. Now, concerning this moment in the life of Nachshon ben Aminadav, it is expressed in a tradition, the writings, that he prayed to God while he jumped into the sea. Why? Because he drowned. Nachshon drowned in the sea. You guys know that song we sing, the Micha Mocha? We spoke about this in the past as well, right? It starts off by saying, Micha Mocha ba'elim Adonai, Micha Mocha nedar ba'kodesh. So they say that every one of those words was another step that he took into the ocean. He said, me, 1 foot, the water was up to his feet. Chamocha, it was up to his knees, right? The next verse, up to his waist. When it got to his mouth, he couldn't say Chamocha anymore. That's why we sing Mi Kamocha in the second verse, because you can't go underwater. You choke if you try that. That's why we say Mi Kamocha in the second verse. That's tradition, right? But he went so far in that he actually died. He drowned in the water. And listen to this. And as he was dying, he prayed a prayer to Hashem. It says he prayed the following prayer, which is Psalm 69. When you guys get home this afternoon, go read Psalm 69. It's the prayer that Nachshon prayed as he was drowning. It goes as follows. Here's some pieces of it. He says, "Save me, God, for the waters have reached unto my soul." He's saying it's now his soul already. His body is now gone with. The waters have reached to my soul. I am sunk in the mire of the shadowy depths, and there is no foothold. I have entered the watery depths, and a rushing current sweeps me away. Oh God, you know my folly, and my guilty acts are not hidden from you. Let those who wait for you not be shamed through me. As for me, may my prayer come to you, Hashem, at a time of favor. Rescue me from the mire so that I will not sink. Let me be rescued from my enemies and from these deep waters. Let not the rushing current sweep me away, nor let the shadowy depth swallow me. And do not let the pit close its mouth over me. And at that time, Moses was praying at length to Hashem, as we read in the parasha. And the Holy One, blessed is he, said to Moses, "My dear ones, the Jews are drowning in the sea while you stand here lingering in prayer before me." So Moses said to him, "Master of the universe, but what is in my power to do?" And God responded to him, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and let them journey forth. And you lift up your staff and stretch out your arm over the sea and split it. The children of Israel shall come into the midst of the sea on dry land." And on account of this, Nachshon's willingness to sacrifice himself, the tribe of Judah merited to establish dominion in Israel. As it says, when Israel went out of Egypt, Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominions. The word sanctuary there is the word lakadsho. Judah became his sanctified ones. What do you call it when someone dies a martyr in Judaism? Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name. This is another idea of the suffering Messiah who had to die on behalf of the nation, of the whole nation. For what reason did Judah become his sanctified one and Israel, Judah's dominions? It was because the sea saw and fled. That's what the Talmud says. All right, there's a whole bunch of stories I shared with you guys today. It seems to be story time today. So Nachshon's self-sacrifice, his sanctification of God's name, also merited the splitting of the sea. And we see both of these things in the person of Yeshua. Both types of the Mashiach, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, in the story of the splitting of the sea, happens in the person of Yeshua. Mashiach ben Yosef was the sinless man with the empty tomb who was brought out and was resurrected, who died on our behalf. Mashiach ben David represents Nachshon's leap into that ocean. He leaped into the beyond, just like Yeshua leaped beyond this life. He was the first to go in to the afterlife. He was the first fruits of the resurrection for all of us. And he got resurrected into his immortal, incorruptible body, like that matzah that he took when he broke it. We went and found it at the end, and it came time to finding the afikoman. Have you thought about the way that we view the redemption? Many people look at the redemption and think, yes, Jesus saved me, that's it, I'm good to go. They don't realize that Pesach is a 7-day story. That final redemption still lies ahead of us. There's still work to be done. And there's going to be more tests to come. You think you were redeemed, but 7 days later, here's a sea in front of you and the Egyptian army behind you. Do you still have faith in God, even though you think you were redeemed already? How many people are going to stand there at the final redemption when the trouble comes and they're going to say, is it because there weren't enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die? Instead of remembering that the redemption is a multi-stage process. So for us, every one of us standing here today, as we still await the final redemption of the Messianic era, which, by the way, is the focus of these final days of Pesach. Remember, the first day of Pesach, remember, is the first redemption. And from Egypt, the final days of Pesach are pointing towards the coming of the Messiah at the Messianic era. As we do this, we should be confident that this walls of sea water in front of us, the challenges that are going to come our way, shouldn't be a problem for us. In fact, consider them already parting. Someone has already jumped into the water for us, and is praying on behalf of us, interceding for us before Hashem, asking him to bring us all out of the depths of the water. Don't be worried about the graves in Egypt, because what's going to happen? Yeshua promises us all of these graves are going to be open. Why? Because God has protected us from that angel Samael, from Satan the accuser, by keeping him busy with a strong ram, Yeshua, until every one of us have crossed over. That loaf of bread that the king gave to the dog, that symbolizes God handing over Yeshua unto death, so that we can all make our way to that messianic banquet with the king. And it doesn't end there, because what did the Midrash say? God's going to go back. He's going to go fetch that ram. He's going to fetch that loaf, because he's going to resurrect it after Satan thinks he had victory through death over Yeshua's body. God says, I will resurrect that body. That loaf is going to come back, that incorruptible matzah. And then Hashem will do that same thing for all of us. So let us celebrate this last day of Pesach as if we ourselves had literally witnessed the salvation of the splitting of the sea in front of us. Because if you think about it, in the greater scheme of things, Yeshua, who fulfills both roles, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, has already done the hard work for each and every one of you. Chag Sameach.